a life well lived is where you've behaved in a way that not only is fulfilling for yourself, but has a positive impact on yourself, your family, your friends, your community, your colleagues. That you've done good in the world and you leave the world a better place than you found it.
Hello and welcome everyone. I am Vishal Khandelwal and this is the 1% Show. This show is an open ended exploration into the minds of the wisest people around to help us learn to think, invest, and live each day a little, even as little as 1% better. You can learn more at vishalkhandelwal.com. I have an extra special guest on the show today, and he is Barry Ritholtz, the co founder, chairman, and CIO of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He is also the creator and host of Masters in Business, the most popular podcast on Bloomberg Radio. Barry has been called the blog father for his long standing finance blog, The Big Picture. He is also the author of the book Bailout Nation, which is an engaging look at what led to the financial crisis of 2008. Barry has been named one of the 15 most important economic journalists in the United States and has been called one of the 25 most dangerous people in financial media. We'll talk more about that. He has spent his career helping people spot their own investment errors and to learn how to better manage their own financial behaviors. Barry's observations on the economy and the markets are unique in that they are the result of both quantitative data and behavioral economics and a function of his unusual career path in finance, which also we are going to talk about in this show. Barry's blog is perhaps the most well-known oasis of economic straight talk on the web. I have been reading him for the past 15 years now, and he was one of the persons who was really part of the inspiration for my work at Safal Niveshak in the first place. He's one of the very few financial blogs I read consistently and love everything he has to share. With this and no further delay, here's my extra special guest on the 1% Show, Barry Ritholtz. Barry, honored to have you on the show, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And I'll let you in on a little secret. You know, when I first launched Masters in Business and after I worked my way through my contact list, I had to go out and beg people to be on the show. So when someone like you says, "Hey, do you want to do this?" I'm like, "Yeah, how can I say no?" Enough people have said yes to me. I feel obligated to repay the favor, pay it forward.
Thank you so much, Barry. Thank you so much. So my first question to you, Barry, is about your origin story, right? Take us through your background, your journey, and the most important lessons learned during your growing up years that have helped you in adulthood. Also, I got this Twitter request for a question connected to your background, which sought an elaboration on something you said a year ago about using your ADHD as a superpower and how being in that condition has worked for you. So over to you, Barry.
Wow. So the problem is that in my podcast, I've kind of trained myself to speak less and let the guests say more. And I don't know how to moderate myself when I'm on this side of the microphone. So this topic I can talk about for an hour. I'll try and give you the short version, and I'm watching the clock. I grew up, a little bit of a curious but lackluster student. And some of it had to do with some deficits I had. Very much ADHD, very much dyslexic and learning. I wouldn't say learning disabled, because unlike other people I know who are dyslexic, I never had problems reading. In fact, sit me down with a book and leave me alone for a couple hours. I was a very happy camper. As a kid, I didn't know left from right is my favorite example. And I have a vivid recollection of taking the driver's exam, holding the steering wheel. And every time the person says, make a left, I would do this. Make a right, I would do that. And finally, the driving instructor says, what the hell are you doing? And I said, left is the hand that makes the L. And I don't know left from right. I have symmetrical dyslexia. Some people have other dyslexia. It's really minor. It's never really affected me other than make a left, make a right. Now, once I got married, left is the hand with the wedding band. Right is the hand with the watch, because I'm a lefty. But I'm a lefty, but I throw righty. Ambidextrous makes it even more confused. So anyway, the lesson from that was when you have deficits, you have to develop ways of overcoming them. You have to come up with routines, and usually you have a deficit because something else you have is a surplus, is not a deficit. So a lot of people look at real ADHD, not there's a tendency in America to diagnose any boy who acts out as ADD. I, as a kid, was like really significantly ADHD before ADD was the fad. But I think it's really misunderstood. And someone on Twitter I saw asked you, "Hey, ask him how ADD is a superpower." And as a kid, it's not a superpower. The best thing about ADHD is first, as you it attenuates slightly as you get older, but also it teaches you, hey, there is a solution to every problem, and you just have to be clever and thoughtful about it. So I've said before, ADHD is a superpower. People misunderstand it. It's not a deficit of attention or concentration, although in some ways it manifests itself that way. It's a hyper focus on things that interest you. That's clearly a superpower, to the detriment of anything that doesn't interest you. So, taking a tax course in grad school, just shoot me. I want nothing to do with that. Just boring. Now, the people who find that fascinating, great for them. But my challenge was always, if it wasn't initially interesting, I had some difficulty with it. So hyper focus, laser focus on stuff that interests you, superpower. Creativity, seeing connections between disparate things that are apparently unrelated but turn out to be related. Hey, that's a superpower. Being intuitive, to some degree, is a superpower, although it can lead you down the wrong path, and that eventually is how I got interested in behavioral finance and cognitive errors. And then lastly, the ability to hold certain types of crises at arm's length, to put it in a box, compartmentalize it. I never had a problem when the markets were crashing, when we had these big, down 9% days. I thought those were amazing because I understood within the concept of history, hey, how often are you down 5%? How often it's rare enough. Pay attention, look for an opportunity, and don't react emotionally. Approach it mathematically, logically. And so I always, thank goodness there wasn't Twitter in 2000, or really Twitter wasn't all that popular in like 08, 09 period. I have vivid recollection of now, it doesn't hurt that we were on the right side of that trade, but when the market's down 500 points, 1,000 points, I would go to YouTube and find Tom Petty's Free Falling and play that. And some of the other traders were not happy hearing that sort of stuff. But it was kind of, if you can hold the fact that, doctors have to be objective when they're operating, which is why they don't operate on their own children. You need that, hey, this isn't a live human being feeling pain. This is, I have to stitch this up or this person will bleed out, and let me go about my business. So I kind of approached market crashes and things like that with that, the ability to compartmentalize it. That's a superpower. And so I had kind of a weird background. I grew up fascinated by a lot of things, a lot of math and science, but lots of other things. Got to college and found out that, you can't just coast through AP physics or advanced calculus. You have to really do the work, because without that, there are other really smart people here. It's one thing when you were one of the smart kids in high school. Suddenly you go to university and you're surrounded by a lot of really talented people. Oh, and a lot of these people in your departments, they work their butts off. They're not just coasting. You can't get away with what you used to. So that was sort of a big insight. And really, it took till grad school before I turned around and said, hey, I really have to prioritize and focus on getting the most I can out of an education. It's more than a syllabus. It's more than a reading list. And one of my regrets in life is that I learned from my mistakes in college and really took advantage of grad school, working with professors, spending time outside of the classroom in the library with different people doing study groups. And I wish I was that mature and serious in college as I was in law school. It was really a huge different. So that's the short version of an unusual background. I started out applied mathematics and physics undergrad. By the time I was done, it became political science and philosophy. And using those, I ended up going to law school, really practiced for a very short couple of years before taking an opportunity to go into finance. And I think it was pretty worthwhile.
So while reading about you, I realized you have always been interested in a great many things, right? Not just finance, but also science, technology, psychology, music, statistics, film, logic, media, philosophy, history, law. So the list goes on, right? So what made finance so fascinating to you that you made a career in this field after studying to become a mathematician and then a lawyer? I read a post where you mentioned about your unusual career path in finance, but would love to hear it straight from you today.
Sure. So, I loved law school. I found law school to be absolutely fascinating, really an amazing experience. Very intellectual, very deep, thoughtful. Kind of had a sneaking suspicion that the U.S. Supreme Court is full of crap and is really just, at least in the modern era, is just partisan. And when you read Oliver Wendell Holmes or Benjamin Cardozo or Felix Frankfurter, when you read the great justices of a century ago, these people were deeply philosophical, deeply committed to the idea of democracy and equality, even though they believed in the original sin of America is the compromise on slavery, and then the ongoing segregation and no women voting rights. And as much as America was supposed to be a shining city on a hill, we've since learned there's been a lot of compromises over the year with people who weren't white, people who weren't men, people who weren't landowners. I mean, on and on it goes. We've since made some progress, and then we've made over the past half century, there's been a lot of backsliding. So I knew that as much as I loved the abstract academic discussion of law, the practice of law was boring and tedious. And if I'm a big picture guy, and it's not a coincidence, that's the name of the blog, the practice of law is minutia, tiny picture. And I just got bored. A friend who I had worked with started as a trader and had said to me, "Hey, you're rational and logical and you're fast with numbers. Have you ever thought about finance?" And my mom, invested in stocks, and she was a real estate agent. And so it was always household conversation. And so I got a tour of the trading room, was really intrigued by what I saw. And this was mid 90s when everything was on fire. Like a lot of people say today feels like 99, 2000. To me, today feels like 96, 97, not even 98, 99, where there's just so much money sloshing around and the world is blowing up. When you, before the phrase FOMO existed in mid 90s, if you were not investing, trading, buying stocks, the FOMO was huge. And when I had an opportunity to exit what I was doing legally and start on a trading desk, hell yeah, that looks like a ton of fun. And to my chagrin and surprise, I was pretty good at it, but I was more intrigued by, and I've told this story a million times, the guy sitting on my right is having a great month this month. The guy sitting on my left is getting killed. And then next month they switched. Like, why is this guy who was crushing it, why is he getting crushed this year? And why is this guy who stunk the joint up last month, why is he having a good month? We're looking at the same screens. We're seeing the same information. We all had the same training, which was little, but enough to give you an explanation of what was going on. What's happening here? And the takeaway has been there has to be something in the way we perceive the world around us, the way we exercise thought, and the decisions we make, how our judgments manifest, that is driving this. And I don't know what that is, and I need to find out. And two books kind of led me down that path. The first is Jack Schwager's Market Wizards, which it wasn't directly a behavioral finance book, but it talked a lot. So he interviewed a bunch of people who turned out to be wildly successful traders and investors who, Wall Street legends before there was such a thing as Wall Street legends. And the themes, if you look at the world from a 30,000-foot view, the themes that come up over and over again: discipline, staying within your lane and your expertise, understanding what you know and what you don't know, making good decisions, taking high probability chances as opposed to just swinging at everything that comes by you, over and over. And you find out that, man, there's a ton of behavioral finance before we even had that phrase. And then the other book, I don't remember how I found it, but Thomas Gilovich's, he's a professor at Cornell, How We Know It Isn't So, was kind of, I want to say that came out early 90s. How we make decisions and all the errors we make that we're wholly unaware of. And that book is what sent me down the rabbit hole. That book led me to Kahneman and Tversky. It led me to Dick Thaler and Bob Schiller, and on and on. Meyer Statman and David Dunning, and the list of behavioral finance greats just goes on and on and on. And Robert Cialdini, and who am I forgetting? William Bernstein is a person I end up finding through that. And then James Montier, who used to work at SocGen, who's now at GMO. And Dan Ariely is another person in that space. And, you just end up discovering a million different people who are actually clinical psychologists or academic experimental psychologists who've done the real research. Like, I might have intuited a few things these people put together, certainly Kahneman and Tversky before anyone else, but then a run of other people. They did the experiments and they showed, here's why we tend to be risk averse. Here's why we don't understand sunk costs. Here's why we think money is different when all dollars are fungible, and we engage in this mental accounting. And all the things I was learning in that space, suddenly the guys on either side of me, when I would ask them, why'd you do this trade? Tell me why you bought this here and that there. I could find either behavioral or cognitive explanations for their behavior that allowed me to figure out where they were going wrong and right and learn from their experiences. And so that was enormously helpful, as was, I'm normally very oblivious to myself. Like, especially in my 30s and 40s, I was very unaware of my own tendency to make mistakes, to assume things, to engage in a little Dunning-Kruger lack of metacognition. And so one of my first bit of self-enlightenment was recognizing that A, I really loved trading. It was so much fun. But B, if you're always looking for a vein, if you're always looking for that adrenaline rush, well, then maybe this isn't a career. Maybe this is, something that is fun and it's a great hobby, but it is not, if you don't have the objectivity to do what is the highest probability trade, not the most fun trade, well, then this probably shouldn't be a career. And so that was like my first recognition that trading is great, but perhaps it's too much fun, and you should take this body of research that you've been amassing the past 5 years and see if there's a healthier, more productive what's the word I'm looking for? Not outlook, but see if there's a way that you can deploy that in a way that's just more productive. That output needs to be less focused on the adrenaline highs of trading. I'll tell you what was the great trigger for that insight. Tuesday nights, we used to at the after. So I was a trader back when at the end of the night you would export your trading blotter to an Excel spreadsheet. You would clean up the spreadsheet, export, save that to a disk, and we used to jokingly call it sneaker net. We'd walk it into the head trader's office. And on Tuesdays, when the trading day was over, the quote server would be taken offline and it would become a Quake server. And that was one of the first massive multiplayer first person shooters. So whoever wanted to hang around and play, we would play. And the same high I got from trading, I got from Quake, where grab the nail gun, grab the grenade launcher, frag your buddies, learn the environment in Quake. The new technology today is just so much better. The visuals are better. Everything is better. But Quake was like one of the first really immersive multiplayer games where you could just get lost in it. And I recognized the same buzz, the same high playing Quake that I got trading. And that's when I said, oh, so you're doing this for the adrenaline. This is a dopamine fix. This isn't a career. And so I decided maybe I should be an analyst, strategist, portfolio manager, not a trader.
20 years later, how have things changed for you?
So the 20 years allowed me to take that nubbin of knowledge, that little tiny bit of knowledge I had put together over 5 years, and just dive into. I don't know if you can see. I'm going to point my camera down. I just have a giant stack of books that I plow through on a regular basis, and it's been really three things really have changed since then. So first, I've had 20 years to dive deep into the entire syllabus of behavioral finance, of cognitive decision making, which is, I kind of define that behavioral is how we manifest ourselves, how you can see the behavior. It's exterior to us, what we do. Cognitive is what's happening inside. What's going on in your brain, in your endocrine system, in your all of the various adrenaline, dopamine, go down all the list of our various internal chemicals that drive our behavior, what's happening on the inside. And the combination of the two of those things are really important to how investors behave, the decisions to make, how they feel, and how that affects how they deploy their capital. So that was the first thing. 20 years of that has been really helpful. The second thing was I had been writing in college, and grad school, law school forces you to do a lot of writing. And then I kind of put it away for like a decade. And towards the end of the 90s, I started writing again. I was writing for work. I was writing for all the brokers who were in our office. And I kind of got bored of answering the same question over and over again. So I started putting the daily notes up on Yahoo GeoCities. Originally I would write something and just tape it to my computer screen. And then that started getting Xeroxed around the office. And then it started getting faxed elsewhere. And then eventually it became an email list, and that morphed into a blog. So it went from GeoCities in, I don't remember, it was 99 or 98, but late 90s, to TypePad, which is a six-apart company, in 03. I was a beta tester for them on the strength of something I had written about 9/11. And then WordPress in 08, and we've been on WordPress ever since. I know a lot of people love Substack. I'm still old school. Put it on the blog. If you want to subscribe and get the email sent to you, great. If you want to, surf over on the web and do it, fine. Or find it on Google, that works fine. So I found writing, and consistently writing, enormously helpful. First, it helps you figure out what you think. Second, writing in a public place, it really forces you to be able to not only explain your thoughts, process, position to other people, but to defend it. And so writing publicly was a big advantage. And then from that, I started getting invited onto radio and then TV, and then I got invited to write for the street.com. That eventually became the Washington Post. That eventually became Bloomberg. And so suddenly having a defendable position about the economy, markets, investing led to, wait, now I have to publish about this? Oh, in a real publication? Okay. And it turned out people were interested in whatever nonsense I had to say. And it kind of led to a lot of interesting things. A lot of the stuff I write and have written over the years has been pushed back to things I don't really love. Like I hated what they used to do with economics journalists. They wouldn't, let's find someone who understands statistics and probability and economics and put them on the economics beat. Instead, they would just hire some kid right out of college, probably had a liberal arts degree, and then throw them into the deep end of the pool. And the next thing um, they're publishing nonsense because they don't know better. I had I had an argument with the editors of the Wall Street Journal. I want to say this was like '06 or '07. They were writing, well, as much as people are saying the housing market is terrible, look, you can see the sales in May were better than April, and sales in April were better than March. Things are on the mend. Hey, idiots, look at the calendar every year. That's seasonal. That's like writing an argument. People want to move their kids into a new school district for the new school year in September. Nobody wants to start mid-year. It's very hard to meet people, to make friends. You're behind. It's much rougher. So based on that, the housing market starts to pick up. So from January, it picks up a little bit in February and March, and it peaks in June and July, so you can move and be ready to go in August for the start of school in September. It's been like that for 50 years. This is not a genius insight. Anybody who knows real estate, my mom was a real estate agent, understands this. And so I show them a chart. Here's what all the Januaries look like. It's up to here. Here's what all the Februaries look like for the past 5 years. Here's the past 5 years of March, of April, of May, of June, of July, and then it starts coming back September. And I couldn't get them to recognize that. It was really frustrated. So I'm like, you know what? Why am I writing a letter to the editor? I'm going to put this on the blog. And lo and behold, I get a very embarrassed email from a senior editor. Why didn't you reach out to us? Hey guys, I reached out to the writer and the editor. Let me ask you, why are you putting somebody who doesn't understand the basics of real estate reporting this National Association of Realtors spin? This is bullshit. Put a qualified person, not an intern. Same thing with non-farm payroll. Each month, 2 million people leave their job on an average month out of 160 million people in the labor pool. 2 million people leave their job. Another 2 million people start a job. The difference between 2 and 2 million, which is essentially zero, is the non-farm payrolls each month. So if it's 2.1 and 1.9, hey, it's 200,000. Think about that. And it's a fraction of the 160 million people. So you can't get obsessed by it. But if you look at the overall trend, to quote George Box, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So if you look at the historic trend of how that's done, you could say, hey, when this is wildly off for a few months, we need to pay attention. But any 1 month is an outlier, is a modeling problem, is just a random outcome sometimes that you can't. And yet each month they do the countdown. I love watching CNBC when they have the countdown on Friday like it's a Blue Origin's rocket launch. Hey, it's not a rocket launch. It's a model that's giving you a ballpark estimate of how many jobs net were added or lost. And take it with a grain of salt. My favorite thing was the new home sales, not existing home sales, but new homes. And the way that data is gathered is they ask home builders. The Bureau of, the Commerce Department asks home builders. Now, if you're a home builder, if you've met home builders, these are not the most organized office paper. These are guys in the field building houses, laying concrete, framing out houses, putting up sheetrock, putting in plumbing. They don't care about this. It gets tossed to somebody. Here, Figure out how many houses we sold last month. The data has a plus or minus of 23%, a crazy number. Just how could you pay attention to that? The answer is if you take an average of 6 months, you get a sense of how. None of this stuff is graduate level probability analysis. This is just like statistics 101. This is basic. I'm 17 years old in college, and if you don't know this crap in first semester, you should have it figured out by the end of your first year. And yet, the Wall Street Journal and other they're reporting stuff wrong. So that became a big focus on the blog. Is like, if these guys aren't going to get it right, I'm going to call them out on it. And lo and behold, myself and dozens of other bloggers, I would say we forced the media to get better. Same thing with Masters in Business. Television interviews were always terrible. I was coming back from a conference in Vancouver. I had to change planes. I think it was in Chicago or Montreal. And while you're changing planes, there was a layover. So I'm in the lounge watching TV, and CNBC brings, I don't remember if it was Bill Ackman or David Einhorn. I think it was somebody famous. And the interviewer just asked the dumbest question. So, what's your favorite stock? When's the Fed going to, I don't even remember if it was raise or cut rates. Where's the Dow going to be next year? Every question they asked was stale the moment that person walked out the door. And so I get on the plane back home, kind of annoyed by this, and I bump into a friend and we switch seats. So we're sitting together, and he's like, "Why do you look so angry?" I'm like, "I just watched the dumbest interview, the worst questions." And I explain, and he says, "So what would you ask?" I'm like, "If I had a guy like that, who are your mentors? How did you develop your philosophy? What are your favorite books? What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started your career? If you were advising someone going into your field, what advice would you give them?" Like, just, substantive, real stuff. P.S. All those questions eventually became Masters in Business questions. And that interview kind of, maybe it was 2010. I don't remember when this was, 2011. That interview stayed with me long enough that when Bloomberg asked me to write for them, I said, "I have an idea for this thing called a podcast, and here's what I'd like to do." And, to their credit, they're like, "Well, listen, we don't really do that, and no one's going to talk to you for 90 minutes. But if you can talk people into sitting down with you, if you give us 32 minutes, that's an hour of broadcast radio, plus traffic, news, sports, weather, etc." So that was the origin of Masters in Business. Just my frustration with how television was doing interviews with fund managers and others. P.S. A lot. My mom describes that as infantilism. She's like, most kids, by the time they're 2, they come to realize the world is not going to change to satisfy them, and they grow beyond it. You've never grown beyond that. Essentially, all these things you've done is because you're annoyed that people aren't doing it the way you think is right, and you're going to show them. And I'm like, well, a little bit. I can't dismiss that out of hand. So that's the origin of both the blog and Masters in Business, was annoyance that other people were doing things in a way that I didn't like. Do it my way. And to some degree, a lot of these things, it's not just me. I'm not trying to take credit for this, but the whole movement towards self-published writers and bloggers and the entire podcasting phenomena has been pushed back to the inadequate way. I mean, not every interview show is going to be 60 minutes. You can't do it any better than that. That said, sometimes you just want to let somebody sit down and tell their story, and hopefully it's compelling.
Wonderful insights, Barry. Now I realize why you've been called 21 of 25 most dangerous people in financial media, right? There are rare people in financial media, especially who call spade a spade, right? And the emperor is naked. Right? After reading you for years now, I think I know the reason why, right? But what did finance do to you for you to be in this place with this quirky title of one of the most dangerous people in financial media? What are the biggest sins that you see in finance happening that really trouble you for you to carry on writing about these things year after year?
So I don't really know how to write and pull my punches. That's a boxing expression. Pull your punches. You don't really hit somebody hard. You just tap them. I don't know how to do that. If something is like an egregious, offensive idea that's wrong, I feel the need to call it out. And it's funny when I'm younger, when I'm outside the Citadel throwing Molotov cocktails at Wall Street. That's one thing. Now I have to balance the fact that I'm running a firm, that I have some sway with some of these companies, that I could go to them and say, this is wrong and we want you to do something different. And here's why, as opposed to just yelling at them from outside. So that's kind of morphed over time. Number one. Number two, finance has allowed me to find a healthy outlet for that anger. And, you go to law school, you have a sense of justice, right? This is right, this is wrong. You quickly find when you see the criminal justice system that it's not just, it's not fair. And I'm not even talking about the ultra wealthy skating. I'm talking about people who can't afford their own lawyers. They have terrible outcomes. The whole system it's not that it's rigged against them. It's rigged in favor of people who can access excellent lawyers or even good lawyers. But the poor, well, some public defenders are pretty good. Some of them are not. And the people, it's one thing if we you go to a barber school and the people learning to cut hair on your head. And the worst thing that happens is it's a bad haircut and 2 months later it grows out. But we do that with, young defense lawyers, and they don't know what they're doing. And hey, we'll figure it out. If a couple of people end up going to jail for 10, 20 years, well, that's the cost of your education. That I found that was infuriating. My wife has said to me, like, where does this anger come from? I've always had this sense of injustice. And so I look at finance as the same thing. For most of the history of finance, you really didn't know what your costs were. You really didn't know how well the performance was. You kind of relied on instinct and reputation and word of mouth, and that's pretty terrible. And it became pretty clear to me early in my career, when I moved from a trader to the sell side. So I didn't like the structure of the sell side. You shouldn't be a financial advisor, whether they're a CFP or a broker, a stockbroker. It shouldn't be like a used car salesman. It shouldn't be like an adversarial relationship. It should be more like your accountant, your lawyer, your doctor. It should be a fiduciary relationship. The obligation of the advisor should be to the client's best interest, not their own best interest, not the firm's profit margin, the client's best interest. That was a pretty radical perspective, apparently. I didn't know that. The other thing I kind of figured out early and was annoyed by, and maybe this is dangerous, is that people could do this themselves. If you want to do this yourself, if you're interested, you don't have to be a genius. You just have to be moderately intelligent, interested, and disciplined, and you can manage your own money. Most people run afoul not on the intelligence side or the interest side, but the discipline. And that paints us back to behavioral finance, because if you lack the discipline to not give in to your gut instincts and your emotional outbursts, well, you're not going to do well. And so eventually I came to realize the sell side was the wrong side for me. I moved to the buy side, and within, I want to say, about 5 years of that move, we ended up launching Ritholtz Wealth Management in 2013 with fiduciaries. I brought on, it was myself and Josh Brown that we launched with, along with Chris Venn and Michael Batnick. And we attracted a lot of people who, the idea that you don't have to be an adversary to your client. You don't have to jam crappy product down their throats. You don't have to sell expensive commission stuff. You should provide a service, And the service should consist of financial planning, portfolio management, tax assistance, and estate planning. And for people who have enough money, helping them to manage philanthropy. That's how you earn your fee, not selling X this week and then following week buying Y and selling Z. It shouldn't be transactional. It should be a relationship. And that turned out to resonate with a lot of people where, depending on where the market closes today, we're about $2.5 billion. When I tell that number to family, they're always really impressed. And I'm like, you understand that there's about $100 trillion in assets. And if we go global, it's even more than that. $2 billion is a rounding error. It's probably 7 zeros past the decimal point. Don't be impressed with it.
So you've been writing for 20 years, right? Now you've been managing money for the past 7, 8 years now, and $2 billion may be a rounding number for you, right? But it's a big number, anyways, right? Is there something that makes you nervous in this job of managing other people's money or handing out financial advice to others compared to just writing about it?
Um, Nervous is the wrong word. So there's a I love the term. How does that idea expressed as an investment? The word express. And so if you're, I used to call the group of people who wrote but didn't manage assets, including myself, ministers without portfolios, which is a diplomatic term. He's his minister, but he's got no job duties. Well, if you're just writing about it, it's very easy to be objective. Hey, you should have bought that here, and tomorrow you should sell that. But it's different. So one of the things you learn is when we were buying individual stocks before we launched RWM, like you buy MasterCard, it comes out at 75, it goes to 100, it goes to, you're buying at 100, 125, 150. How can you explain to the client that he paid 200, but a client 6 months earlier paid 80? You can't manage money that way. It makes no sense unless you're running some sort of a fund. And even then, it's a very different risk reward analysis. And so you start exploring, hey, maybe asset allocation makes more sense than chasing individual stocks. And maybe indexing is better than trying to be a stock picker and blah, 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 blah. So that's how managing real money manifests itself versus trying to do something just writing. You force yourself to express the ideas you write about in a portfolio structure. And you quickly come to realization that, generally speaking, simpler is better, but it doesn't have to be. I saw someone the other day gave advice to somebody. You should own this all stock fund and you should own this all bond fund. And I'm like, well, there's no global exposure there. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of missing from that. Like, I don't want to, what's the old line? Things should be as simple as they can be and no simpler. Two positions, a little bit too simple. 100 positions, way too complex. Somewhere between 5 and 10 and 15 is probably the right mix, depending on the person's needs, plan, risk tolerance, etc. But you can easily put together a 5 holding portfolio that does everything somebody wants to do, very inexpensively and very simply. The people that have more complicated needs are going to need a little more, but I'm talking 10, 12, 14 positions, not, these portfolios come into the office and you look at them and it's like, why do you have 40 mutual funds and 200 stocks? I don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense to me. So there's a big difference between just writing and managing money for people. It changes your focus. The reality of get out of the market, sell everything, right? That's a much more difficult thing to do when you're managing money, because suddenly about half of the accounts we manage are taxable. So wait, if I'm going to sell everything, there's a 23.9% if it's long-term, 33% if it's short-term gain here. So am I confident that the market's going to drop 33% just to get break even with the tax hit And then am I confident that I'm going to catch that bottom right there? Because there's no reason to do it just to sell, match what you have to pay in taxes, and then get back in. That seems so suddenly dealing with the real world of buying, selling, timing, taxes. It's, gee, unless I'm really confident that the market is going to fall 50% and I will be able to identify that bottom in real time, it doesn't make sense to sell this and deal with the taxes. Arguably, we got very lucky with that in 08, 09, but that's not how we manage money now. And I wouldn't recommend trying that unless it's so obvious. I mean, to me, 08, 09 was very obvious. The only question was when it was going to happen. And I was writing about that. If you've been reading me that long, you remember I was writing about that right into the teeth of that. And even having gotten that more or less right, I wouldn't want to manage assets that way going forward. It's not how I would want to run assets. Because, was I skillful? Was I lucky? Can I repeat that? I don't know. And that's really a challenge.
You love to quote the American science fiction author Ted Sturgeon, right? Who coined this law called the Sturgeon's law, that says that 90% of everything is crap, right? So, as an observer into the investment landscape for so many years, what major items would fall into that 90% crap basket for you, as far as investing is
So
concerned, and what would fall in the remaining 10% basket that consists of the meaningful stuff in investing?
Sure. So Ted Sturgeon was both a sci-fi writer and a critic in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And he used to get grief, but people don't remember science fiction was a pulp, throwaway, thought of as a junk literature back in the day. And someone once asked Sturgeon, "Hey, how come 90% of science fiction is garbage, is junk?" And Sturgeon's response was 90% of everything is crap. And if you stop and think about it, it's really true. The top decile of everything is where you ultimately want to end up. You want to buy a mutual fund, most of them underperform their benchmark, but at least they charge you a lot for that. You want to be a stock picker, most stock picking is a losing enterprise. You want to launch a business, most businesses fail. Forget being great. Most businesses fail. I laugh every time somebody says to me, "Hey, I'm thinking of investing in this fill in the blank restaurant, Broadway play, movie." It's like, well, Hamilton, survivorship bias. Here we are back to behavioral finance. Survivorship bias is everything. It's everything. Whatever you see is a result of massive failure falling by the wayside, which is invisible, and all that's left is the survivors. And when you see success, you drive by a successful restaurant, you go to see Hamilton, you look at this beautifully made house. I love to use the example of books. So there's like 100 books on the New York Times bestseller list each year. And then there are all these other secondary bestseller lists. There's the Amazon bestseller. There's all these other things. But think about there's 300,000 books published each year. And then beyond that, there's another, I think it was 700 or 900,000 books self-published. So not a publisher, not Random House or Scribner's. It's there's another chunk of those. Then there's another 3 million manuscripts that get sent around, and people say, "No, this is really terrible. No one's going to read this. We're not going to publish this." So you see these 100 books out of what was essentially a pool of 3 or 4 million. How hard could it be to write a successful book? Really, really hard. It's hard to write a book, and then to make that become successful is even more random. And so survivorship bias changes our view of the world because we think quality and excellence and success is much easier than it actually is. It's deceptive. And so that leads us to some really strange places. And again, I don't know if I answered the question or just danced away from it, but it's much harder to do things really well than people realize.
Survivorship bias, we see all of it everywhere, right? Investing, especially investing, where people are looking at businesses that have stood the test of time, or stocks that have really done well, right? Or investors who have been popular and have done well over the previous 5 years, 10 years, ignoring
Hmm.
that there was similar kind of 99% or 90% other people or other businesses or other stocks which looked the same way 10 years back, but actually were down in the dumps, right? So, as an investor, how does one learn to minimize its impact on decision? Is reading the failures, is researching failures all about it, or is there something else that you've also done to get over this bias or minimize its effect on your investment decision making?
So right, so people always want to see what people want to read the success stories, but there's much more knowledge in failure because first of all, I love the Michael Mauboussin book, The Success Equation. It's very difficult to identify after the fact what was luck and what was skill, and because very often they look alike. Um, uh, I forgot who wrote the book, Good to Great, and they focus on 30. Right, they focus on 20 or 30 companies or 10, whatever it is. Have I ran the numbers a couple of years ago, and the book comes out like late 90s or early 2000s, right after this giant market boom. And rather than recognize that the tide lifted all boats, they focus on these 10 stocks and try and choose lessons. Well, 10 years later, four of them have been through bankruptcy or reorganization. Three of them have underperformed the market over the next decade. And one or two of them have done okay. And one of them did really well. It was a classic example of survivorship bias. And it's amazing that a career was built on a book that was essentially wildly flawed. And so my takeaway from that is we learn a lot more about success from failure than we do from success because, hey, unless you get 1,000 at bats, unless you shoot 1,000 shots on goal, unless you get 1,000 penalty shots, are you good or are you lucky? The smaller the data set, the easier it is for a modest outlying run of coin flips to make you think, hey, this is really good. The reality is randomness and luck play a huge part in life, and it's hard to distinguish it. On the other hand, when we look at failure, especially when we look at failure where people can identify the error in real time or near real time and change it and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, there's lessons to be learned from that. So, the whole concept of Steve Jobs coming back to Apple in 98 and saving the company, it wasn't that he was just coming back, and he had a roadmap for saying, we are not answering the consumer demand for products that are simple and elegant and easy to use. And so the Mac became the iMac, which became the iPod, which became the iPad, which became the iPhone, which became the iPad, and the biggest company in the world comes about from that. Another one is look at Jeff Bezos throwing stuff against the wall to see what works at Amazon. The Fire Phone was a disaster, was a crash and burn. They've done a ton of stuff that didn't work, but the lesson from him was you try a bunch of things, you have some upside targets to determine if they are successful, but you have a line in the sand where you say it's clear that this isn't working and we're going to pull the plug. We're not going to fall into the sunk costs trap. And he's done a really great job with that. Probably no one has done more teaching investors to learn from their mistakes than Ray Dalio. The whole beauty of his first book, The Principles, is how important it is to try to make mistakes, to learn from that mistake, and then to take that principle of what you learn and integrate it back into your model. And so he looks at life as that cycle. It's those series of loops. Try something, it doesn't work out, learn from the mistake, incorporate it, and do it over and over again. And eventually you end up with a process that's really tight and really effective.
Mhm. Which has been your favorite mistake, Barry? Like a mistake which lent you the most memorable lesson or one of the best lessons that you applied in your life with great success after that?
So I'm doing this off the top of my head. I'm gonna give you one or two or three, and we'll see what I learned from them. So the first, I spent the first half of my career, 2/3 of my career, turning down money. I didn't want cash. I listen. I can't have you as the client influence my process, my delicate flower of a process. Your emotion will affect me, and you'll ruin my process. And that turned out to be really stupid. In especially in Wall Street, particularly, you are your assets under management. And saying no for so many years, it's not quite a Bernie Madoff. Oh, no, we don't have room for you. Like he used to play that game with people. Oh, I'd love to take your money, but we don't have room in our funds. And then a week later, hey, you know what? One of the old man Johnson died. I have a slot if you want. That sort of bullshit. And he was really good at it. So that was a mistake, and everything we talked about, the difference between managing money for real clients versus just writing academically and abstractly, it really focuses you. It really changes your perspective. The rubber meets the road with real assets. That's one thing. A second thing is having some sense of who you are, being self-enlightened. And I'm fond of saying I spent most of my life and a good part of my career oblivious. I don't mean oblivious in a Dunning-Kruger metacognition way that I don't know my skill set. The whole problem with Dunning-Kruger is the ability to self-evaluate your skills is in and of itself a distinct skill, separate from the underlying skill, but correlating as you get better. Really good people at X are very good at evaluating their own skills. People who are poor at a certain task are very bad at evaluating their skills at that. That's just a really brilliant insight that has huge ramifications. So being oblivious about different things, learning to work in an ensemble practice, learning to delegate and trust people. I still think I'm pretty oblivious about a lot of stuff. I hope my blind spots are smaller than they once were. But generally speaking, I think I've improved in that area. That's something I've gotten better at. And the third one, I like to do everything in threes. The third one is, kind of learning how to recognize when something is a mistake, and when something is just, an oversight, or when something is malicious. And when I was younger, I just assumed every slight, every anything was malicious. That son of a bitch. Maybe that's where that fury comes from. And as you get older, you kind of come to realize, very often, and this is a little bit of self-awareness of my own obliviousness. Hey, how come when you do something, it's because you're oblivious, but when they do something, this is the attribution theory, again, back to behavioral finance. When you're good, you're skillful. When they're good, they're lucky. And when you're bad, well, it was just bad luck. And when they're bad, well, they deserved it. That's a very human set of perspectives. So my view has been, hey, if I'm oblivious, maybe the other party is oblivious also. Maybe this is a blind spot. And don't just assume they're a lying, cheating son of a bitch out to get you, which is how I was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Now it's kind of, now I've kind of learned to be aware of when my spidey sense is tingling, and hey, that guy's really a bad guy. Be aware of, if you think that guy is screwing you, then he probably is. But most other people, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, because everybody's just trying to live their lives. Maybe this is a little bit of post-pandemic insight, but I kind of started feeling this way about a decade ago. A quick funny story. So I'm a car guy, and I'm very aware of not only what I like to drive, but I notice, I never would have guessed that guy is driving a Subaru. And it's just a funny little anecdote. I'm out in my car one day. I'm out in the convertible on a nice spring day, and I come to an intersection. I don't have this. I have a yield sign. The other side has a stop sign. So that means I get to go through, and the other person's supposed to stop. And it was like this this burnt orange Subaru, which is like a weird, ugly color, and there's not a lot of those cars around. And I know one of the people on my train has that car, and it's a Saturday, and I'm about to enter the intersection, and I see this bright orange Subaru hauling ass. This guy isn't going to stop, and I slam on the brakes, and he blows right through the stop sign, and I was like, "Motherfucker, son of a bop!" I'm going to have words with that asshole when I see him on the train platform on Monday. I know that guy. He parks in my train station. And so a week goes by. I don't see him. I completely forget about it. And then at some point, weeks later, I'm waiting on the platform. What pulls up to the parking spot, parking lot, is that orange Subaru. And I'm like, I am going to rip this guy a new one. So he comes up the stairs and blah, blah, blah. I go, "Hey, how's it going?" And he goes, "Good." I go, "I was out the other day and I saw you on, I don't remember what street it was. And about 2 Saturdays ago." And before I even get to call this guy a jerk, he goes, "Oh my God, what a crazy story. It all worked out well, but I think I wet myself." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "My kids are playing in the backyard. And the little one goes flying off the swing, lands on the ground, breaks his arm, comes into the house, arm hanging out, bone sticking out. My other kid saw it, is screaming in terror. My wife fainted. I grabbed the kid, threw him in the car, raced to the emergency room. Fortunately, everything's fine. They set his arm. Everybody was fine." He goes, "I was never that scared my entire life. I thought my baby was going to lose his arm." And here I am saying to myself, boy, I'm an asshole. I'm ready to yell at this guy because he blew a stop sign. And meanwhile, this guy is terrified that his little kid really hurt himself. And it kind of made me, I don't know, 5 years ago, this is long before the pandemic, kind of made me step back and say, everybody is living their own life and you don't know what the hell's going on with them. And so before you're quick to criticize this guy or call that one a jerk or write this person off, sometimes you just have to give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes you have to say, "Hey, that looks like really bad behavior, but maybe there's something else going on there." Like that conversation, I have a vivid recollection of like being furious when I started the conversation and being mortified, just embarrassed when I was done. Like, "You asshole, how could you were gonna, this poor guy's rushing his 6-year-old to the hospital and you want to yell about him about his driving." It was like a big wake up call. So that sense of trying to understand the other person's perspective, by the way, I think that's the sort of thing that smarter, more mature people figure out when they're children. And it took me till I was 50 to figure that out. But neither here nor there, recognizing that, hey, everybody's got their own world to deal with. And if someone is blowing a stop sign in an orange Subaru, maybe there's a reason for it. I mean, there's lots of behavior that's completely inexcusable, but sometimes you have to at least find out what's going on. And I wish that's my answer to the question, what do you know now you wish you knew 20 years ago? Not that I think it would have, you kind of have to learn that in the real world. It's not something you could read in a book, but it was like I have such a vivid recollection of both the car and the conversation with the person. It's like, wow, that really was, he's not the jerk, I'm the jerk. And that was really embarrassing.
I think that's a beautiful story, Barry. I that took me to Carl Sagan's, I think, speech on the pale blue dot, where he mentioned that this is a small world that we live
Yep.
in the giant universe, right? And there's no other way but to live with complete kindness towards each other, because there's no help which is going to come from outside. We all need to help each
Right.
other out. Yeah. So
There's
great.
there's no cavalry coming, and you better figure out for yourself the sort of life you want to live and the sort of legacy you want to leave. And the sooner you get to that place. So when we launched the firm, um, I know other firms where the founders kept all the stock for themselves and basically, watched everything grow. That was not what I wanted to do. We started out with 2 partners and we ended up, and I think we're up to 15 partners at the end of this year out of 40 employees. And if I could get to the point where not everybody wants to buy stock, not everybody wants the obligations of a partnership, but if I get to the point where half of my employees are partners, I'm thrilled and stockholders in the company, I'm thrilled with that concept. And if that's a legacy we leave behind, that not only the 1,500 to nearly 2,000 families we work with, but the 40 families who are employees, that I think that's a pretty good goal. And so I understood that aspect of it intellectually. The emotional understanding of everybody has stuff going on and you can't imagine what's happening, that took a little longer for me to figure out.
I've been reading you for many years now, right? And I see that you love sharing lessons across. So my next question is about the most important lessons from your experience a young person must practice to break into the world of finance. Yeah. In other words, what do you know today about finance that you wish you knew when you started out?
So there's a couple of things. The first I mentioned earlier was you are your assets under management. The other one, I love to steal from my guests. One of the things that I've had a few guests say that I recognize my own error in it was, don't stress about your first couple of jobs. Use them as opportunities to learn about your field, to learn about your skills, to build up your skill stack. I didn't have that attitude. I didn't have the attitude that I'm going to do whatever I can to become indispensable to my bosses. So at least when I got out of grad school, it took me about a decade after that. I want to say by the time I was in, working on Wall Street for 5 or 10 years, I kind of figured out I know how to make myself indispensable. I know how to make myself better. And even if this isn't the job where I'm going to end up for the rest of my life, I understand that um, I'm going to leave a mark here. And, when I was younger and I would leave jobs, it would be, burn the bridges, torch the boats and move on. And the past few jobs I've left before we launched RWM it was gratifying that the growth, the maturity that I picked up was, hey, if it doesn't work out, if you want to come back, the door is always open. That's something that didn't happen to me in my 20s and 30s. But by the time I got to 40, I kind of, and again, very belatedly, maybe this is a little bit of a function of my own deficits, but I eventually figured out you don't have to burn the bridge behind you. You could basically leave with a handshake and a farewell and on good terms. And that learning everything you can from your first couple of jobs and leaving on good terms is something I didn't know, but wish I did.
So talking about investing again, I believe learning how to think and think independently, right, is more valuable to investors than any specific finance theory. So what are your thoughts on the same about thinking independently? How can one learn to think independently, especially in today's world of too much information and noise?
So first, I love that question. First, the phrase information hygiene is something that's really important. And second, the hierarchy of knowledge is something else that's really important. You have to understand the difference between raw data, right? Just numbers, and then some context for that data, what it means within the broader world. I'm fond of pointing out that people have denominator blindness. 50,000 people filed for bankruptcy. Well, what is it normally? What's the usual number? What's typical? Is that a lot? Is that a little? 50,000 sounds like a lot of money, sounds like a lot of something. What is it? So that hierarchy from data to information to knowledge to wisdom, right? Knowledge is, oh, now I understand this. I understand what it means. I understand the context of it. And wisdom is and here's what I'm going to do with that for some higher purpose. So understanding that hierarchy of knowledge is really, really, really important. When I started out, I used to read everything I get my hands on. I was an omnivore when it came to information. And I started to figure out after a couple of years, more isn't better. What's better is better is better. Excellent is better. And eliminating the bottom 50% wasn't enough. You really have to eliminate the bottom 90%. And that means sometimes you're going to miss some stuff, but generally it means you're spending your time well reading things of quality, things that matter. I find I read publications less than I read specific authors. So The Atlantic is a perfect example. I like The Atlantic generally, but there's a handful of people there like Derek Thompson and Ed Wong and other people. Like whatever they write, I consume because their stuff is just fantastic. And there's a lot of different people like that where it's not so much that I'm reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but I'm reading specific authors there, and that makes that makes a big difference. And then lastly, you have to be self-aware. You have to know, what do I know? What don't I know? What am I completely blind to? That's important. And what do I think I know? That's wrong. I mean, that's the old Mark Twain quote. It's not what you know that gets you, it's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And so those four things, where the limits of my knowledge are, what I believe to be true that's false, where I clearly don't have information, and the unknown unknowns, the things I'm oblivious to, the things that I'm not even aware that I don't know. Those four things, if you could work your way through those quadrants, that will help you become a better thinker. And I could throw out a bunch of different models, mental models that people use, but there's a ton of research. There's a lot of books on that. People can learn that themselves. My favorite example is always the counterfactual and the inversion. When I was working on Bailout Nation, I decided to say, what would have happened if we didn't bail out Chrysler in 1980? Might the world be different? Might Chrysler had to have had compete, and maybe they sell to Toyota, Honda. Maybe that forces GM and Ford to cut their costs, cut their management layers, cut their pension, cut their, like, all these different things don't happen. The better example is probably long-term capital management in 1998. Now, there was no government bailout, but there was an arranged bank bailout that was organized by the Federal Reserve. And what did long-term capital management do? They used way too much leverage on an exotic investment product that, when it blew up, threatened to destabilize all of finance. That sounds like that would have been an important lesson. And if we would have let the $100 billion in client assets that invested in that, if we would have let them go to zero and those people all got burnt, maybe the financial crisis doesn't happen. Maybe there's a lesson to be learned that, hey, you can't speculate endlessly with a lot of leverage and other people's money. And if it blows up, you get to walk away scot-free. The wrong lesson was taken from that. And the right lesson should have been, don't do this. Not, if we do this, the Fed will bail us out. Although arguably, maybe that was the right lesson, because that's what ultimately, other than Lehman Brothers, that's ultimately, and Washington Mutual, and there's a whole bunch of banks that went under. But ultimately, the lesson that was learned was not the one I hope to be learned. And so all this comes back to, you have to know yourself, you have to know your own mind, and you have to understand how to think independently and thoughtfully, even if what you're thinking and saying is unpopular or an outlier. And, there weren't a lot of people in '07 saying, hey, you can't have, the average price, the average relationship between median income and median home price went like this for 40 years, and then it went like that. That's no good. Something's wrong there. The relationship between rent and cost of purchasing, That doesn't make sense. The same thing with the relationship between GDP and housing. All those things that are like 3, 4 standard deviations, 5 standard deviations away from normal, that's a warning sign. And so even if it's unpopular, I have a vivid recollection. Myself and Peter Bookvar, who also writes about finance and works for an asset management firm. The two of us were on CNBC and we were talking about housing and derivatives and why this represents a potential threat. I want to say this was like early '07, and we were long at the time. So hey, listen, we're long, but we're watching this carefully. We think this ends really badly, and we were. It's the first time I was ever laughed at on TV by accident, not like a joke, and someone laughs, but like the bulls literally laughed at us. And I remember walking out of the Madison Avenue studio, heading downtown with Pete, and I said, either we're right and everybody else is wrong, or I just don't understand anything about finance. And this is going to go for 10 years and we're going to be really embarrassed. And he's like, I don't think it's going for another 10 years and I don't think we're going to be embarrassed. But it was amazing, that experience of, saying something unpopular, being mocked. And maybe that's why I kind of got a thrill when the market collapsed the next year. And I got to make fun of the people who were, one of the traders in my office said, "Dude, there's blood in the streets. Can you be a little less giddy? You're going to get us killed when we walk outside." And it's like I had to eat crap for years warning about this, even as we were long. I described so in Barron's in August of 2008, 2007. They said, "What's your investment posture?" And I said, "Miserably long. I just want to climb." The quote was, "I want to climb into a cave with a bunch of gold bars and sleep this off for a year or two." And widely mocked about that. So being it's there's a great line in Monty Python's Life of Brian. He would say, Brian says to the assembled unwashed masses, "You are all individuals. You are all different." And the crowd responds in unison. "We are all individuals. We are all different." It's, everybody wants to be a contrarian, but everybody can't be, especially because the market more or less is right most of the time. Most of the time, when the trend is heading up, the market has it right. It's just that little tiny hook at the end, the bend at the end, is when being a contrarian pays off, or whether it's at the bottom, same thing. So independent thought, humans, primates, are social animals, and we evolved very much for social proof and reinforcement and getting along with the trend. And here we are, back to behavioral finance. The studies they've done where they would put a bunch of people in the room, and the not realizing that the subject didn't realize that most of the people in the room were Confederates of the experimenter. And the teacher at the front of the room would ask a question, and how many people think A, which is clearly wrong, and 65% of the hands go up. They're the plants. How many people think B, which is kind of right, and a handful of timid hands go up? How many people think C, which is absolutely right, and no one raises their hand except one person in the back? And it just goes to show you, who you're going to believe, me or your lying eyes. Humans are really influenced by the crowd. It's very hard to be outside of the mainstream for any extended period of time. It's a challenge.
You wrote a post recently that was titled "Gradually, Then Suddenly," right? Which you suggested should be the mantra for investors. And you wrote in the post about how the world changes slowly, a little bit at a time, but it all ends up like compounding. You also wrote that because things change gradually and then suddenly, that helps to explain what William Goldman once said, that nobody knows anything. So, what things you expect to see around to change gradually and then suddenly that people know nothing about as of now in markets investing in?
So first of all, I think everything changes gradually, then suddenly. And the example, so I used two interesting examples. One was the Grand Canyon, and explained how, years, decades, millennia, you're just slowly wearing away at stuff until eventually, 5 million years later, you have the Grand Canyon. But the story I use as an example was driving a 1967 Corvette. Beautiful car, blue, white interior, stick shift, 327 engine. I wasn't a crazy Corvette guy growing up, but you see these cars today and they're spectacular. They're beautiful. They look to me like Ferraris of the old days. And so I got to spend a couple hours in one of these. And cars change a little bit each year. First of all, this car is manual steering, which if you go to turn the wheel and it's like you're opening up a rusted closed thing. It's like really hard. You'll end up with giant forearms if you do that for any length of period of time. The brakes are mediocre. They're lap belts. It's not even 3-point belts. It's lap belts. Forget, my wife's car which is a relatively new car, has the 360-degree camera. So when I'm backing into a tiny spot, like I could see exactly how much space I have around. This car doesn't even have a passenger side mirror. It wasn't an option. They didn't make it. You don't need to see what's on that side of the car. Just look out the front windshield. The rear view mirror is this tiny. There's no ABS. Forget things like lane departure or blindside warning. This is essentially a big lawnmower engine in the front and a sexy shape, and best of luck with you. You put on a lap belt after spending a few decades with 3-point. Forget the pretensioners. You slam on the brakes and your seatbelt tightens up, and there's crumple zones and there's airbags, the whole side thing. This is a go-kart. This is what, like when you're a kid, you build a downhill go-kart with a motor. And it's like you just don't realize over the course of 50 years, a series of little improvements compounds. And in investing, the metaphor is clearly it doesn't take giant gains in the market. You do 6, 7, 8% a year. Over 30 years, it's a ton of money. It adds up to a ton of money. Over 50 years, it's giant money. Look at Buffett. The vast majority of his wealth has come in the past 10, 20 years because of the right tail effect of long-term compounding. Hey, 20, 30 years is great, but 40 to 50 years, it's just amazing. That 67 Corvette is about when Buffett began investing. And so he has the benefit of investing for 55 years. A huge amount of his compounding has taken effect in the last couple of years. And so you don't think these little changes, these 1% changes, people don't think they make a difference. But improve things 1% a year, or heaven forbid, 1% a month. Just make things a little bit better, get a little smarter, read something new, learn a new skill, just a tiny little bit. Over time, that compounds to a massive, massive gain. And you get out of a 67 car and you get into a new car, it's like you're in a spaceship from the future. Like my wife's car has the newest navigation system and computer control stuff. It's insane what it's like. You start to drift out of the lane, the car pulls you back into the lane. A lot of stuff with cars that do that, and it could be anything from Tesla to the Ford Mach-E to the Porsche Taycan. The technology is, you don't even have to go back 50 years. If you could bring somebody from 1990 and drop them into one of these cars, their head would explode. It's the future. It's a spaceship, and that's the result of small improvements year after year, compounded over half a century, and suddenly you have this Grand Canyon. You've created from a trickle of snow that melts and runs off. You have this massive thing, and that is magic. And I think that's the magic of compounding is something that investors don't often think about, but it's important. It's real. I think it really makes a big impact on ultimately how well people's portfolios perform. So be consistent, start early, get a little better each day, and eventually you end up with, a modern miracle, whether it's a new car or a portfolio that allows you to retire comfortably and your kids' college to be paid for and other things that you want to do positively with money as a tool with purpose.
So I was reading this book, A Zero to One by Peter Thiel, and he mentions that his favorite interview question is, "What important truth do very few people agree with you on?" So my question to you is, what important investing truth do very few investors agree with you on?
So this is kind of interesting because what I've noticed, it's not so much that I'm a contrarian as I think I'm a little earlier to pick certain things up than a lot of people. So it was clear to me early on fiduciary was the way to go. I think a lot of people have moved in that direction. We essentially run a version of about half indexing with a slight value tilt. I think indexing is certainly can't. I don't feel like I'm early to indexing anymore, and certainly not early relative to Jack Bogle launching Vanguard in '74. Um, so I'm trying to. I would have to really think about what investing truth I have that a lot of people don't agree with me. The one thing I will say is I have come to recognize. I did a blog post like 15 years ago or 12 years ago called "Strong Ideas Weakly Held," and even that I've started to see more people talk like that. I think you have to be willing to um, revisit your fundamental beliefs, your prime thoughts, because even your establishing principles, sometimes the way you developed a investing philosophy 20 years ago, the world has changed enough that you have to revisit first principles, because first principles in 1995 are different than first principles in 2021. So and again, I don't know if a lot of people disagree with the concept of, well, let me phrase it this way. Recognize when the world changes to the point that you have to make a change in your belief or portfolio, or whatever. I think intellectually, a lot of people agree with that. But in practice, most people will find it impossible to change. The cognitive dissonance, and people have a really hard time saying, I used to believe X, and X isn't as true today as it was. So now I have to morph that to Y or X plus Y or whatever. People might say they understand that intellectually, but in the real world, they don't really believe it. And so that's the takeaway. I would say I would have to think longer and harder about investing truths that I have that other people disagree with. Because I think most of the stuff, so nobody has a monopoly on truth and on truth, on rationality, and on evidence based thinking. And so if those process gets you there before everybody else, well, at a certain point in the future, the rest of the world are going to figure that out also. So I can say fiduciary, indexing, bringing your employees, giving them the opportunity and a path to equity so they're a potential owner of the company. I can't say any of those things are not widely held. It's just that people evidence them less in practice than in reality. But you're gonna send me down the rabbit hole thinking, what do I believe? What do I think that most people disagree with?
What's a piece of commonly accepted investment wisdom that you disagree with?
Oh, sure. This is a ton of stuff out there. The people don't understand how hard it is to pick stocks. Like my brother brings me stock ideas all the time. What about this? What about that? I don't know. So the best answer to your question, the previous question, is I love saying I don't know on TV, and I've been doing this for years, and I've noticed more people are starting to do it. But where's the Dow going to be next year? How do I know? A year is a long time. So much can happen. If you insist on a number, I would say, well, let's extrapolate the average of 8% a year forward. And if nothing random happens, well, then you're good. But how often does nothing random happen? Something happens all the time. So 8%, but probably not. So that's the idea that that's the answer to the question, what do I believe that most people don't? I believe when you don't know something, you should say, I don't know. Stay in your lane. Every time we talk about COVID on TV, I'm like, understand, I'm telling you what I believe investor sentiment is around COVID and the economy, not what the epidemiology is. I'm looking at behavior and sentiment, not that. What do I think is wrong? I think so. I'll give you a couple of things on. I'm working on a presentation that has a few of these. First, I'm genuinely shocked that the average person has no idea how well they're doing performance-wise, especially when it comes to alternatives. So when I speak to rooms full of ultra high net worth investors, I love to tweak them and say, you guys aren't going to like hearing this, but 90% of you have no idea how well you're doing net of fees and taxes relative to your benchmark. You have no idea. You're in hedge funds, you're in venture capital, you're in private equity. You don't have a clue. And that's by design. The way private equity reports returns and IRR, it's confusing as all hell. Venture uses a totally different standard. Private equity, you make a commitment and they draw the capital down, so they're not sitting with money. Meanwhile, you have to do something with that money anyway. And hedge funds, the net of taxes and fees, it's a very different number than what goes out in those annual letters. So most of you have no idea. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is really fascinating is, and there's a book on this called Black Box Thinking, is the concept that you need to be aware. And this is just something, it's not that I think people are wrong about. I think people are just oblivious to this. Where are your single points of failure? Where is something that if something in this whole chain of events goes wrong, the whole shooting match collapses? And that's something that a lot of people, my partner Ben Carlson would call that organizational alpha. Can your organization operate so that if you get a blowout on a tire on a truck and you have a delivery that must go out, there's a plan B that's not a single point of failure that ends it. There's a resolution to that, and you can still meet your objective. So individual investors don't have that. The stock picking stuff is obvious. The ability to pick stocks. And by the way, all the studies have shown people are better at picking stocks than they are at selling stocks. They tend to either sell stocks too late, meaning they start to roll over and they ride it down and give back all, or they sell it too early. It's going up. And, I did a column for the Washington Post years ago. Bet you sold your, I think it was 2014, bet you sold your Apple, Google, and Amazon a long time ago. And, it's true. People are like, oh, yeah, I owned Amazon. Well, when did you sell it? 2012. All right. Well, thanks for playing. So but none of these are like, it's academically, all these things are really well known. I would have to really think of something. So I keep using the word oblivious. So let me come back to that. I think that, and again, I don't know if people are going to say, if everybody else is wrong about this. I think people are unaware about this. I think the way we learn and how we process information and how we make decisions are as important as it is. It's much more important than people think. And the flaws in that process are so great as to override everything else they do. Their research, go down the list. Your decision-making process is so crucial. And that fourth quadrant of what don't I know that I don't know is so huge. I think that's not only the biggest investment mistake out there, but I think that's the key to all of human unhappiness and conflict and strife and problem, is that we simply are unaware of our knowledge, our skills, and our ability to do things. And that leads us to an endless series of mistakes. My friend Dave Nottig, I love this line. He says, investing is a problem that's been solved. And he's absolutely right. When it comes to investing, own a broadly diversified portfolio of low-cost indexes. rebalance annually. See you next year. There it is. It's all of investing in 2 minutes. And yet we continue to screw it up. People continue to outperform their benchmarks. Investors continue to stink it up. Why is that? The answer is because we're oblivious to all the things we do that undercut that simple truism. And that's the underlying problem, that if humans would be less oblivious to these things, the whole world would be a much better place.
Great insights there, especially the part where your friend said that investing is a problem that has already been solved, right? So wonderful.
Yeah.
Uh, we're nearing the end of the conversation, Barry. So I'll just move out of investing and to ideas with a bigger picture, as you would say. So first thing is
Hmm.
philosophy, right? Like you mentioned earlier, philosophy has been one of your areas of study in the past. So what has or what have been the most important philosophical ideas that you've applied to your life with great success?
So there's two. Really, they're the same thing. So I'll try and phrase it simpler. So I've been intrigued by existential philosophy. Life is meaningless, right? Go down the list of Sartre and Heidegger and blah blah blah. Um, but that's the first half of the equation. If life is short, brutish, and nasty, to quote Hobbes, and meaningless, the problem with certain philosophies, they stop there, and it's your obligation as a human being to figure out then what. So if life is meaningless, it's up to you to create your own meaning. And how do you create your own meaning? You have to find something that is satisfying to you, adds value to the world, allows you to live a fulfilling life. And nobody gives that to you. That's something you have to discover on your own. And I think that is the most interesting insight that existentialism led me to is, well, sure, Camus said the world is empty and meaningless. That's not where the curtain drops. That's the starting point. Now, what do you do with that? And I think that's important. Um, the other philosophical aspect of life is understanding causation. So go back to David Hume and what is causation? And I'm amazed that people, so of all the things I see in the world that people get wrong, people do not understand what causation is. That but for X, Y would not occur. And when you do roll out X, Y does occur. And so therefore, we can say that X causes Y. Now, if the same underlying factors are impacting both, then you would get Y without X. And if it was random, then you would have X sometimes, you would have Y, and sometimes you wouldn't. Understanding the basic concept of causation is massive. Amazing how many people don't get that. And that cascades into everything. We talked about information theory and information hygiene, in decision making, in understanding the limits of your knowledge. If you don't understand causation, you're going to have difficulty across the board. And it's not just in investing, in professional relationships and personal relationships. You have to learn what that means in a philosophical sense and integrate it into your life.
About habits, we all creatures of habit, right? So my question to you about habit is that what habit would you say most positively impacts your life?
So I started writing because I wanted to become a better writer, and it didn't take a lot of research to figure out how to become a better writer. A, read really good writing, and B, write a little bit every day. And so I started getting up early at 5 in the morning and just writing for an hour. And that was, I don't know, 25 years ago. And over time, you just get better and better at it. And that habit, some people say it's 90 days, some people say it's 6 months, some people say it's 30 days. Once you develop a habit, it becomes hard to break. When you skip it, you feel like it's missing. And that's been like an enormously productive habit for myself, enormously useful.
That's right. I think I got my answer to the question about how is Barry like, despite wearing the hats of an investor, a columnist, a podcast host, right? get so much writing out day after day after day. I've been reading your morning notes, your evening notes, almost on a daily basis. So I think that really helps me answer that
Yeah, a
question.
little bit every day. Plus, everything I do, and here's I'll let you in on the secret. Whatever I do, even if I'm making like a shopping list for the supermarket, I'll find a way to reuse it. Everything I so when we're debating an idea in the investment committee, I'll think about that idea. I'll think about why one side was X and the other side was Y, and what can you pull out of that? And that eventually becomes a post. That eventually becomes a column. So I'm constantly thinking of what's the lesson in here. You don't want to allow a one off to go by. What's the Dalio lesson from how this might or might not work out, and what can we take away from it going forward? And that all becomes fodder for the morning writing.
You read a lot, right? So what are your favorite investing and non-investing books that you highly advise people to read?
So a book I loved that I read last year. I think I wrote a post on the my 10 favorite books that year. Americana by Boo Srivdinson. Fascinating. Looks at the history of the public-private partnership between the federal government and the private sector. Just teaches you amazing things as to how things went on. That was really a fascinating book. And the other one, and I'm going to check the title. How to Invent Everything: A Survival Guide for the Stranded Time Traveler by Ryan North. I love that book because it's just a history of everything that's ever been invented. And back to being oblivious, some of these huge world changing inventions, almost all of them could have been invented 500 years earlier. Now, the microcircuit, you couldn't have invented that a century earlier. That came about as soon as it could have come, and but so much other things that were invented could have been invented 100 years, 1,000 years earlier. The technology was there. We were just oblivious to it. That's a really fascinating book. That's something I've really enjoyed. Um, I'm trying to, and the most accessible behavioral finance book is going to be Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. There are other behavioral finance books that I really like. Influence is another one that's very accessible. Uh, but Dan Ariely's Predictably and Influence by Bob Cialdini is tremendous, huge book. But Predictably Irrational is like a very basic entry level anecdotal stories that really show people here's how you can access this world of behavioral finance, which turns out to be so influential and so important. So those are the three books I would, off the top of my head, give you.
What is the single best piece of advice you ever got, and the single worst piece of advice you ever got?
So the single best piece of advice was something along the lines of you want to be an owner, you want to have equity, you want to have upside in the venture. If it crashes and burns, oh well, the corporate shield prevents you from having liability beyond the bankruptcy. But if it works out, you want to have equity stake. I got that advice, probably 10 years too late, but it worked out okay. When I was at a company, Maxim Group, I didn't see a path to own. And by the way, those guys were great. I loved working with them. That's one of the first places that said, sure, come back, work with us. But I didn't see a path to ownership, and kind of led me to having to hit the eject button. Um, so be a stakeholder, have ownership, have equity. It's really important. The worst advice, I don't know. I tend to keep my own counsel and be dismissive of advice. There's nothing worse than unsolicited advice. Hey, if I wanted your advice, I'd ask you. We've all heard that expression. Um, and if not to be too contrarian, but if you got bad advice, it means you're asking the wrong person for advice. When you go and ask someone for advice, you want someone who's experienced in that space, who's walked in your shoes already. And you don't want someone who's one experience colors their whole view. You want someone who has an arc of that. There's a great XKCD cartoon of a guy standing lecturing to a crowd and he won the lottery. And he says, people are going to tell you you're wasting your money and you should give up. But I didn't follow advice and I kept buying lottery tickets and eventually it paid off and it'll pay off for you. That sort of stuff is kind of hilarious. I would say generally the bad advice I've gotten is the advice that I've recognized as the result of survivorship bias, that you're giving me advice based on this success. But, I can't follow your exact path and my path is going to be very different. You know what? I could give you an example of so normally, if you get bad advice, it's problematic if you don't recognize it. We had just launched Ritholtz Wealth Management. We were like a year into it, and someone came along to buy us. And a friend said, take the money. Why do you want to build a company? Take the money. That could be the worst advice. We were $100 million, $200 million. It was like 90% ago. That was the worst advice. And, on a trading desk, you hear lots of bad advice, lots of urban myths. When the new Apple iPod came out, I have a vivid recollection. I put this in a column, My Worst Trades. Apple was $15 a share with 13 cash. It was really clear. I got to play with a pre-release iPod. It was spectacular. It was the new Sony Walkman. Not that it was going to rescue the company, but hey, it shows these guys know how to build. In fact, this was my first iPod. This is the original 2002 or 2003 iPod. I keep it on not that I've plugged that in for 10 years. We bought the stock at 15 and all the brokers were selling it at 20. And it's like, why are you selling this? This barely moved. Got to ring the bell, got to hit the bid. And, that advice to not let things we'll finish where we start, not let things compound and to just take the easy money and not be a longer term player. I think that's terrible advice. Hey, no one went broke taking a profit. Well, if you bought this at 15 and sold it at 20, and that was 02, after all the splits, I want to say that's about a 26 cents cost basis. And where's Apple now? Just under 200 in the high hundreds. Yeah, that's a pretty crappy. You may not have gone broke taking profits, but you sure left a lot of money on the table.
Here's my closing question to you, Barry. Everyone walks on their own journey of life and everyone must play their parts well. But what, according to you, is a life well lived?
So nothing I'm about to say is original. This is all channeled and stolen stuff. If you've made a positive impact on the people around you, if you're not just happy, but fulfilled and satisfied, if you feel you've made a difference in the world, and it could be the whole world or just your immediate neighborhood, community, friends, family, whatever, that's a life well lived. I wrote something after Archegos blew up. I wrote a post called "Purposeless Capital." Money, like everything else, is a tool. Your life is a tool, and it could be used for good or less good. And you want to put your tools, your skills, your capital, your energy to work in a way that over the fullness of time has a positive impact. I read about people who have, it's not just the Madoffs and the Sacklers and the Enrons of the world. If your sole purpose is just more money, because I want to buy more junk, that's, there's an interesting book about, the author speaks to all these people in their 80s and 90s and asks them that exact question. And the regrets are rarely the things people did. They're always the things people gee, I should have asked that girl out. I should have bought that sports car. Nobody dies thinking, oh, I'm really sorry I bought that fun sports car. That was a waste of money. They regret the things they didn't do because they imagine them as better than they actually are. But that's a whole nother conversation. So a life well lived is where you've behaved in a way that not only is fulfilling for yourself, but has a positive impact on yourself, your family, your friends, your community, your colleagues. That you've done good in the world, and you leave the world a better place than you found it, and you've enjoyed your one time through. Hey, you get one grab at the brass ring. You've had a life that you can't expect it to be perfect, and we all go back and say, I wish I would have done this, or I made that mistake, but that at the end of the day you say, I took advantage of the opportunities that presented themselves to me, and I'm proud of what I've done and accomplished. I think that's a life well lived.
What a beautiful thought to close this, Barry. Thank you so much for your insights and spending 2 precious hours out of your busy schedule, right? Thank you so much for everything, Barry.
Thank you for the thoughtful questions, and I found this delightful. It's different being on this side of the mic, and hopefully this will help me be better on my usual question asking, because it's fun and different, and I'm going to try and learn something from this.
Thank you so much, Barry. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.